but my name is Katie Platten, and I will be your amateur instructor again. This is my friend Doreen Simpson. She and I think in the last, 4 years have probably canned 600 jars of jelly.
Tons.
I mean, so many jars of jam and jelly. We just love doing jam and jelly together. So she's just going to kind of be my assistant and help me get through some work. So what we're going to do tonight is we are going to make some peach jam using this automatic jam and jelly maker. And that's the thing that we're giving one of those away at the end of the class. And this is another life changer along with the Vidalia Pro. But this is just, it's just, again, takes so much of the guesswork out of making jelly. And I just love using it. So I use it all I actually have 2 of them. And I will have, alternate batches of jam and jelly going. But I also thought, just because I use this, it is a $100 piece of equipment. And I didn't know if everybody would want to spend that. Certainly, you may find it very much worth your while if you end up making a lot of jam and jelly, but it may not be where you want to start. So I actually decided to try some jam without the jam and jelly maker, just in the pot. And I'm going to make some Sandhill plum jelly tonight. So, and we'll do that just in the pot, but it can also be made in the jam and jelly maker. I just wanted to show you some skills not in the automatic machine. So anyway, so we're going to start out, and in your booklet is the peach reduced sugar jam. So the Ball Fresh Tech comes with a whole little cookbook, and they've got all their kind of standard jam and jelly recipes, and then they have low sugar or reduced sugar ones. To me, the reduced sugar ones are so fantastic because you really taste the fruit and not so much of the sugar. So I always use the reduced sugar recipes. So, and the recipes are the jam ones are almost all pretty standard. 3 1/4 cups fruit, along with 3 tablespoons of the pectin, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, a little bit of butter, and then 2 cups of sugar as we go along. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about all the ingredients. You'll see I've marked out some things. We'll talk about that. But right now we're going to just start by blanching the peaches. We're going to need 4 cups of peaches, and I just blanch them with just a shallow X in the bottom of the peach, and then pop it in the hot water. And you want to see this?
Well, is that a pot of boiling water?
Yeah, it's just a shallow pot.
Okay, it's not like a bowl of water, it's a pot.
It's boiling, yeah. This is just to take the skins off. And I'm just making a little shallow cut in the bottom. I probably could have used a little deeper pan. These peaches are bigger. These are fresh peaches from the Prairieland market. They're from Idaho. And I didn't realize anybody was still producing fresh peaches. What do you think? One more?
Probably. I do one. So she need 4 cups.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do one.
So we're just gonna, kind of like when we did the tomatoes last month, we're just gonna have them in there long enough to get that skin kind of loosened up, but we don't want to cook the peach.
Okay, Katie, on your direction here for that,
Yes.
it says coarsely chop and then crush with a potato masher. What am I?
Oh, it doesn't tell you to peel them?
I didn't see that.
It says that first. It's wash, peel, and pit.
It says something about wash.
Wash, peel, and pit. Okay. So, yeah, so I guess it really doesn't give you a very good...
And then after that, you blanch.
Here, let me just.
Yes.
I'm OCD. If you don't, I gotta go.
Yeah, that's a little bit... I love ball recipes because that one's actually even really kind of long. So, but usually they cut to the chase a little bit better, but that whole blanching thing is assumed that I think, in that recipe.
And how long did you blanch them? I'm sorry.
Probably just like 30 to 60 seconds. Just, again, you don't want to cook them underneath the skin. I'm gonna just leave that going. You don't wanna cook them underneath the skin, you just wanna loosen that peel up. And so, oh, and then I pop them into this is just cold water to cool them off, but I've also, and you don't always have to do this for a small batch, but I've been so disappointed when I've made larger batches and had a whole bunch of fruit cut at the same time. So I use this Fruit Fresh. It's like ascorbic acid, acetic acid, and if you put, it's 3 rounded tablespoons to 2 quarts of water. And so when I get my peaches out of the blanching water, I put them in the 2 quarts with the 3 rounded teaspoons stirred in, and it just will keep your peaches nice and bright. Doreen and I made, what did we do, 30 pounds of apricots, and we were just got busy prepping them, and pretty soon they just turn brown, and our jam, it still tastes good, but it just looks terrible. So this will make, it's called Ball Fruit Fresh Produce Protector, and you can buy it at Dillon's.
And you said you put that in, when do you put that in?
You put it in cool water.
Oh, okay.
So, and I think honestly, if you look in online, some of them will just have you sprinkle on the fruit too, but I've always put it in water because usually I like having something to cool down the hot produce anyway, since it's been in the blanching water. So if you want to start, Doreen, you could just,
Put 'em in here?
yep.
Okay.
And I'd get a pretty good dice on them. There you go.
The skin's just on here.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to come over and help you. So you notice, like, as you blanched, you see how this skin is just coming right off? And this is kind of an optional step. If you don't mind the peel, you can leave it on. I leave it on for apricots, but sometimes peaches are a little fuzzier than what I want in my jam, you know? But with apricots, once we've processed them and everything, you can't even tell there's peel in them.
Gorgeous peaches.
What's that?
They're gorgeous peaches.
Aren't they beautiful?
Where'd you get those at?
These are at the Prairieland market, and they're actually from Idaho. I think they must have a later season, because I have a peach tree in my yard, and I was picking peaches out in, what,
You just want
early August, I
like that,
think.
Dice like that, just to mash them.
I was going to bring some peaches that I just froze, because sometimes I just freeze them and then make jam throughout the winter. But then Vicki told me that we had fresh peaches, and I was like, oh, that's too much to pass up. And I really do I love local produce. If I can find, a friend or someplace, family member that's got fresh produce, that's always my favorite. But the farmers markets, same thing, and the Prairieland market, everything is local. I also think for jam and jelly that Sam's has really good produce. Dillon's I just find to be kind of meh, because all of it is produced, I think, far enough away that it's not always super seasonal and fresh. But Sam's has great fruit especially if you want to do something that's not really local, like raspberries, I would definitely recommend. We get apricots there too when they've got them. I am moving at the speed of molasses here. The other thing about the Jam and Jelly Fresh Tech Maker is that I love it because it's kind of small batch. I think I told the people that were here at the last class that I'm more of a small batch maker. I don't really want to can 50 quarts of tomatoes at once. I like just being able to start and finish it in a few hours, and I can make a typical batch in the Jam and Jelly Maker makes about 4 to 5 cups of jelly, and I can do a batch in less than an hour. And if I get my doubles out, an hour and a half later, I've got 8 to 10 jars of jelly, and it's just all kind of easy. It's not, I think sometimes canning seems kind of unapproachable because people do it in such big batches, but there's nothing that says you have to can 50 pints at a time.
Putting it in here, right? To measure?
Yep. So we are just working to get 4 cups of fruit here.
How far are
And
we
let
at?
me smash that down. So for the jam and jelly maker specifically says, but I think it's probably a good practice in any case because you're sort of releasing the natural pectin of the fruit. But they tell you just to use a potato masher, kind of break up the fruit, release the pectin. One thing they tell you not to do, unless it's specifically called for in the recipe, is to actually, blend it in a blender. If you go to a puree, you may actually end up with not really getting the texture that you want. And let me just show them this and then we'll press the rest. So you can see we've released some of the juice but we've still got chunks of
Did you put the
peaches.
stuff on there?
That was in the water.
That's all you have to do.
I'm
You mean
sorry?
in that cold water it was?
The cold water had the fruit protector
I thought
in
you were
it.
gonna put it in there.
Nope, I always put it in the water.
So, with the peel on, you put the peaches with the peel still on in the cold water
Yep.
with that. and that works.
Yeah, it does.
That's crazy.
I'm new to this. I never used to use it, but as I started making bigger batches and had some browning, I got so disappointed that I was like, I'm going to start using Fruit Fresh. So
How much do you have there?
and this is showing at a little over 3. I think we'll be able to get it all in here. Do you want to press on this and I'll start making the rest of the recipe? Okay, so this little jam and jelly pan, there is actually some jam and jelly maker groups on Facebook and stuff, and a lot of people say you can make any recipe in these, but the basic thing that this does for you is it stirs for you. And also, because it's all, there's a certain amount of fruit, lemon juice, pectin, etc., it's all pretty automated. So, you know that 21 minutes after you start this, you're going to have jam ready to put in a jar. Sometimes if you're not using pectin, knowing when it's going to be ready, how long you're going to boil is a little bit of a guessing game.
Is that good enough?
Oh, that's beautiful. Is it 4 cups, Doreen?
Yes, just around 4 cups.
Oh, we did a good job.
You want to leave a little texture in there, so.
Okay, a little bit, okay.
So in this recipe, we're going to do, I'm upping this to 3.5 tablespoons just to accommodate the additional, I'm trying to keep my pectin ratio to peaches about the same. So I'm going to do, that's 2. So you just sort of sprinkle it along, I better get I don't really have a 1/2 tablespoon. I'm going to do like that. Sprinkle it along the bottom.
And that comes from Dylan's as well? You get that at Dylan's as well?
Yes, I get mine a lot of times online, but you can almost always find it. And there's more than one kind of pectin. The one that I always use and that the ball Fresh Tech calls for is real fruit classic pectin. There's also low sugar pectins and other things, but this is the one that I like. Then we're just going to dump our 4 cups of peaches that we've smashed. God, they look so beautiful. Then they always ask you to do a bottled lemon juice in recipes, I think because the acidity is very dependable. And what does it say here? 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice. And then just a little plug of butter. The butter is half a teaspoon. The butter is completely optional, but it's just to keep the foaming down, a little bit of oil.
Like, I think that's what, one time I made it, or last year I made it in a bread maker. I have a jam jelly setting, and it kind of stirred it, did all that stuff, but it came out like kind of foamy, and that's right. But the
And
recipe didn't have butter at all.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. So all of the ball recipe, most of the ball recipes call for that, and I kind of eyeball my half a tablespoon. So now we're just going to start this. I'm going to put the display so you guys can see it. So we're just going to,
When does this 2 cups of sugar go in?
they go in after it starts cooking.
Oh, okay.
So we've got all the ingredients except the sugar. We're going to hit the jam button. It'll automatically default to 21 minutes. So, and again, as you get more advanced with this, sometimes you'll realize, oh, my test batch needed a little more cooking time. But I'm just going to hit enter because I know peach jam. And see, this thing has started to stir. Can you guys see that? So it's going to beep 4 times at us in 4 minutes and tell us to add the sugar. Then we're going to put the lid on, and then we're going to just let it cook. And by the time it beeps again 21 minutes from now, it's going to be ready to go into the canner. I want to say one more thing, because I don't know if I really talked about this last time very much, but I believe it's up to a pint, but it's certainly these 8-ounce containers and 4-ounce containers. You always have the option of freezing them. You do not have to can them, but if you want them to be shelf stable, which is really nice for gift giving and stuff, then you're going to want to do the water bath canning. So, but you always have the option of just sticking them in the freezer, which I occasionally do. That is a,
You mean after it comes off of there?
yeah, you don't ever have to can it. You could just take it in here, throw it in your clean jars, put a lid on, and put it in the freezer.
Oh, so after you do this, you're gonna do something over there.
I'm going to actually can these.
Okay. See?
But if you look at in here in the recipe, I think it says, how do you want to enjoy it now and just
Okay.
put it in the refrigerator, freeze it, or can it? I think
Okay.
so I just thought it's a good idea. You cannot freeze quart jars. The mason jar won't hold up to the expansion, but you can freeze these smaller ones. So even though they're glass. Let's get some.
So if you didn't have this little thing right here, you'd be stirring that yourself for 21 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, dear Lord. Okay.
So that's what we're going to do with
Sounds like a Christmas gift to me.
I'm telling you, it was a game changer for me.
Sounds like a Christmas gift from God.
Yes. I have, made so much more. There are purists who think using pectin is kind of cheating, and I think there are probably people that think using a little machine like this is cheating. But I think my jam and jellies are fabulous, and I run a little foundation, and I call on people, and I take them out to my donors and stuff, and they all are always like, so happy to see it, and I'm like, what's wrong with making it a little easier? It's like having an Instant Pot instead of doing everything, on the stove. So,
See, it's over there on the counter. Automatic jam and jelly maker by Ball.
yep. So that's what we're using right here. And but then we'll do the other one on the stovetop so you can just see that process. I just never do it that way because I'm so tied to my machines.
If you did it on the stovetop, then you would have it like on a low setting then?
I would say medium.
Okay.
I would say you want to get some heat going because you do need to get it all heated through. It's like you see that there's a little bit of steam starting to come up, and you would do the constant stirring, and you're going to want it to boil. But again, if you're not going to use the machine, I would just use a recipe until you get comfortable with when do I add because different kinds of pectin also will have you add the pectin at different times and add the sugar at different times. So what we're really doing is this whole ballet between the fruit, the pectin, the sugar, and the lemon juice. And fruit is, oh, there's my, so I'm just going to do my 2 cups of sugar now.
I love this. It says stay within earshot.
Yes. If you walk away, you might miss your op.
Yeah, they wrote that down. But I would have never heard the button. So like me.
Okay, now for jam, we're actually going to just cover the pot. And we're not going to do anything more with this until it beeps again, and then we're going to put it into the hot jar. So by the way, you always want to start everything in hot jars. So I've got the jars in here. I've got about 7 of them. I think we're only going to need about 4, but we're going to need some for the other stuff too. And you just want to keep that all nice and simmering. In the olden days, these 2-part lids, so for years and years and years and years, they always had you simmer these 2, but they've actually reformulated the glue that's kind of on top here, the rubber seal. And I think I said the last time that they don't recommend that you boil them, but they do say it's okay if you simmer them, just like take them up to 180. But they also say it's perfectly fine just to wash them and dry them. So that's all I do anymore is just soapy water and wash and dry my rings and my lids. But we used to boil them, and in fact, this little magnet thing used to be a really critical part of canning because you'd pick up all those these little lids in the boiling water. But now you probably don't need these as much unless you're choosing to simmer. So while this is going, I'm thinking maybe we ought to go ahead and
Do you want
get,
that out of the way and clean?
yeah, that can just, I'll just put it in the sink, yeah. While this is going, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ingredients and the roles that each one of them play in canning jams and jelly. But I also was thinking it'd be a good idea to have Doreen start on the Sandhill plum jelly, and which I'll talk about more when we get in there. I just want her to get the pectin mixed in and all of that. So this is, my husband has a little hunting ground with some friends, and they have those wild plums. They're either called sand plums, sandhill plums. You find them all over Kansas and a lot of the Midwest. And we just discovered this year that we have a bunch of sandhill plum bushes on there. So, and I'm going to talk about how you get to the juice, but I just, as they come ripe, I make the juice and I just stick it in the freezer, and then I can can as I go along. So this is nothing more than water and sandhill plums. It should be 4 cups, but I'm going to have you measure that.
Okay.
And then if you would just whisk in the 4 tablespoons of pectin,
Okay.
and just kind of get some low heat going. We don't want it, we don't need it to boil yet or anything. So, so we're going to take our hot jelly, getting hotter and hotter. We're going to put it in our hot jars, and you want to keep the jars in the canner until you're ready to can. So you don't want to set them out and get them back down to room temperature. And the main reason is just because you might break the glass because of the temperature change. Everybody always tells you too to just use the towel so that you're not putting that glass hot jar against a cold hard counter. So you're always going to want to do everything on a towel. Did you have a question?
Yeah, was that the same thing when, like, anytime you can, you want to keep your jars in the hot water until you're ready and pour them
Yes.
out when you're ready to fill them?
Yeah, I can't think of any. Now, sometimes they will have you do, this is more in pressure can. Well, no, you'll see it in some water bath canning, but you'll even put room temperature food in there, like for dill pickles, for instance. You might put room temperature food and hot vinegar, but your jar is hot. So you want to just kind of work briskly as you're going along because you want everything to stay as hot as possible. And again, you don't want cold ingredients to meet hot glass or vice versa. So,
The jars will break easier that way.
because that you could have a jar break, yeah. So everything's hot. Now I want to talk about, because those of you who were here last month, we talked about how use a recipe, use a recipe, use a recipe, and use a recipe from an approved site. There's lots of YouTube and Facebook recipes out there, and people are canning stuff that's not really safe to can. For instance, you can't can anything with very much dairy in it. You can't can anything with cornstarch in it. There's just certain ingredients that you cannot can no matter how you can them, because there's just never been a tested safe recipe. In your materials, I have way down at the bottom, and this is the same one that was in last week.
Oh, yeah.
But these are just resources that I really like. And one of my favorites of all of these is, I think it's the final, no, it's, where is it? Oh, it's under number 4, the second one, www.healthycanning.com. And even the strictest groups on Facebook and stuff like that website. She uses all approved recipes, but oftentimes she explains things in a way that you can understand them, where sometimes the extension agencies and the National Center for Home Canning doesn't always explain the whys of why you're doing something, and that website does. So I love that. But now when you get into jam and jelly, you actually have a little bit more flexibility. And the reason is because we talked about pH. So you can safely water bath things that are highly acidic. But if they're more alkaline or less acidic, then you have to add acid to them. So that's why when we pickle, we add vinegar. Even when we do tomatoes, they're actually right in the middle of the pH scale. And so we add tomato juice or vinegar to tomatoes as we can them. But fruit, almost all fruits, probably not bananas, but most fruits are highly acidic. So that's why there's a little more room to because you could just can fruit and it would be acidic enough. You don't have to add lemon juice. Sugar doesn't have any effect on food safety. It is for flavor, and it also helps preserve the food for longer. So these full sugar recipes, I think you could easily get 12 to 18 months out of. I always do reduced sugar, and I notice after about 6 months, the tops of my jams and jellies get a little bit darker. Let's see. Which makes me so mad, but it's just the way it is. But can you see how there's just a little bit, how it's just a little shaded up here? So that's not a food safety issue, but it's a pretty issue to me, Same thing with this one. This was canned in January, and this was February. And there's just a little bit of a dark top to them. Not food safety, but it's because I'm doing low sugar. So if you like it with more sugar will preserve it prettier longer, but it'll also make it sweeter. But the ballet between all the ingredients is that the fruit is acidic enough, so there's not a food safety issue unless you start adding non-acidic foods. So like if you decide to make a bourbon blackberry jelly, so your blackberries are nicely acidic, but the bourbon is going to bring that pH more alkaline, right? So you want a recipe because you're adding ingredients that are going to change the acid level. The same thing with I did an apricot poblano recipe, apricot poblano jam, and the poblanos are low acid, so they are going to change the recipe. Typically, dried spices are pretty safe to use. You don't have to really worry about it changing the acid level. But if you're going to be adding non-acid ingredients to your jams and jellies, you should follow a recipe. A lot of people make jalapeno jam, and you make that with lots of sugary vinegar. And the vinegar is what makes it acid enough. But here we've got, so the pectin makes your times really reliable. You can make lots of jelly without ever using pectin. There's certain fruits that are really easy to make without pectin. But this makes your cooking time real reliable. The sugar gives you shelf life of pretty, not a food safety, but a pretty. and it also kind of interacts with the pectin. The lemon helps kind of encourage the pectin too. So the biggest thing that you risk if you're using proper canning procedures, the biggest thing you risk is having loose jam or jam that's too stiff. So, like for instance, my apple scrap jelly, which if you're ever doing a bunch of apples, you can just save the scraps and make jelly out of it, just like I'm going to show you how to do the Sam Hill plum. But see how that's, because I didn't have enough pectin and my chemistry. So I can still pour this over cream cheese. I can put it on toast. But to me, it's just not as pretty because it's all wobbly like that. Most of the time when I get jelly that I'm not as excited about, it's because it's too thin. I only remember one time ever making jelly that was too thick. I made some carrot cake jam and it was just stiff as all get out. And I ended up just reprocessing it and added some apple juice to it to thin it out. So this first website on your resources list right here, where is it? The NCH one, NCH, that's the national website for canning safety. They have some great resources on what if my jam's too thin? What if it's too thick? And I've done both before. I've thinned out jam that's too thick, and I have thickened up, which means you have to recook it, jam that's too thin. So I would definitely go to that NCH because you're probably going to make mistakes at the beginning. But again, most of the time, if mine's wrong, it's thin.
What did you say the lemon, it encourages what?
What's that?
What does the lemon encourage?
The lemon encourages the pectin to work, so it helps it set up. There's all these nice chemical reactions between the acids in the fruit and the lemon juice, the sugar and the pectin. So again, playing with the recipe as long as you don't add low acid ingredients is not a food safety issue, but you might get stiff or runny jam but you can play.
So this is probably a stupid question, but,
No.
because I mean, I go to the store and I buy jam and I buy jelly.
Uh-huh.
But when you're making it, what's the difference?
Oh, okay. That's not a stupid question at all. It's a good question. So jam is made with the whole fruit. So jam has stuff in it. Like this.
We're boiling.
It's already boiling? Will you just kind of turn it down a little bit? Like this is the peach jam. We're going to try it tonight over cream cheese. And all these little blobs are cooked peaches in it. The jelly is when you take the juice off the fruit, like we did with the sand plums, and you have a clear liquid. In fact, if you ever want to practice, the easiest way to make jelly would just be to use grape juice or apple juice. As long as you use something that doesn't have calcium added. To me, that's not fabulous flavor because it's just store-bought apple juice, but you can make jelly from it.
Oh, really?
But it's a clean juice. So jelly you can kind of see through, and jam has stuff in it.
Okay.
So
So what does the calcium do? You know what the calcium does then? Why you don't want calcium in your juice?
I don't know exactly why, but I think it interferes with the gel set. But I don't quote me on that, but I think that's what, but they always in recipes say if you're using a bottled juice, don't get calcium added.
Does any of this, like baking soda or baking powder, you may want to make sure it's fresh if you were going to do baking, but like does any of this go bad? Any of the, like the food preserver or your pectin?
Yes. Okay, so if you go look in a canning cookbook, which I will pass around some of these canning cookbooks, it'll tell you that you should probably replace your pectin every year. So it does expire.
Well, like my mother-in-law, she might kind of crazy sometimes, but she throws it in, she'll throw it in the freezer.
Well, and that would probably be another, yeah. And I just started using this year, and it says best by November of 2024, but I think you could always pop it in the freezer and yeah. But they do say replace your pectin every year. I go through several jars of pectin every year, so I never have had to worry about, is it still working? But if you ever got a runny batch, it's either your pectin or your cooking times, you know.
So you said earlier that you reprocessed one or something like that. Can you reprocess any jelly if it's not, the consistency isn't where you want it? You can.
Yeah, I don't do that very often. It's got to be pretty much an epic fail for me but there are ways. I think it's online. I've done it like maybe a couple of times, and you reheat it, you dump it all back in the pan, you re-clean your jars, boil your jars, and then you're going to add some more pectin and bring it back to a boil again and do it again. And the same thing, thinning it out. I think you usually thin with like apple juice or some complementary juice that doesn't have calcium in it, and then reprocess it. Thinning it to me is is more dependable than thickening it, because if you boil fruit too long, like if you're doing it on the stove, sometimes you can kind of break the pectin. So again, it's one of the things that's nice about using pectin instead of just using the natural fruit pectin. So how many minutes? Oh, we only have 2 minutes left. Okay, so.
So when are you knowing that it's bad? Like you already put it in the jars and you did the water bath and then you took it out of the water bath and you were like, Before, just like when you were this stage before you put it in the jars.
Usually I'll show you, because as you're spooning it into the jars, it will be as soon as it starts to cool. And in fact, for canning without pectin, they oftentimes tell you to put a china plate or a earthenware plate or whatever in the freezer and get it good and cold. And when you can put a jelly on there and it will set up very quickly, when you put like a couple of drops of jelly, it sets up really quickly, your jelly's ready to go. So it's as it's thickening, as it's cooling, it's thickening. And if it really doesn't thicken while I'm spooning it into the jars, then I pretty much know, I probably didn't get enough in there.
So you'll know within the first 5-10 minutes while you're trying to
Yeah.
stir it? Okay,
Yeah.
spoon it in.
But,
Okay.
but let me tell you one other thing. That's a little bit, because
This is beeping.
it will also, yep, it's done. So I'm going to get these jars out of here. Jelly also, they will oftentimes tell you to let it set up for a week or two. It will thicken over time. So, and if you've canned it properly, then you can pull it out after a week or two and thicken it. But I don't think I've ever had such a failure that I was like, before I even got to I always let them cool on the counter first. And a lot of them don't. Like when they come out of the water bath, it can be really loose and it'll thicken up as it cools. By 12 hours later, it'll be much thicker. So I think you would probably, I've never just said, oh, that was a fail, and stopped and redid it. So this is a really important tool. There's most of the special equipment you don't have to have. You can use pans like we've got on the stove here, but these are some important things. This one is just a great way to lift a hot jar out of the boiling water without burning yourself. And then this thing, you need a funnel to get you want to keep your jars really clean during the canning process. This thing is something that we use you can use this side of it to make sure you don't have any air bubbles in your canned stuff. That's not usually a problem with jelly, but like in canned tomatoes and things like that. It also, we're going to talk about head space, and each one of these little stair steps is 1/4 of an inch. So this head space should be 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to fill these jars until they get to that first stair step. So let's just get started real quick. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Now that you may have jinxed me because it looks a little thin here.
No, but that would be good, 'cause then
Okay, I'm going to get another towel just to stick the dirty thing on. This is another thing. Do you want to turn that on full blast, Doreen?
This?
Yeah, actually, yeah, we'll use that for the.
High? It's on high.
Yeah, it's on high. Okay. Well, is it all the way there?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So do you want to look at it? kind of loosey-goosey,
Yeah.
but it's got some syrup to it
So how come it's not frothy?
because we added the butter.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
The butter is super helpful at,
So that's gonna thicken up, huh?
and so again, you see that it's almost like soup. I've got some broth, some sauce, and I've got some whole fruit. So I'm trying to get relatively even amounts of broth and fruit in each one of these. And I usually put out more cans than I think I'll need. But if you can't get all the way up to the head space, then that's required for the recipe, then you don't want to can it. You can just put it in the refrigerator and eat that one first. Yeah, so the process that occurs, you're more of a scientist than I am, but the process that occurs is, I think that when you put it in the boiling water, it pushes the oxygen out, and I'll talk about that a little bit too, because we don't tighten this down to the nth degree. We leave a little bit of room for the oxygen to push out, and then when it cools down, it vacuum seals. So you push the oxygen out in the water, and now with the cool down, it vacuum seals the lid. And that's what creates the safe environment to make it shelf stable. So if you can't get to the appropriate headspace, that's probably one of the most common things that people do. But remind me also to tell you about siphoning, because sometimes you'll feel like you did it wrong and you didn't. So I'm just going to see what I've got here. So I'm just running this around. That one's good. That one needs a little bit more. 3 of them need a little bit more. Just making sure that I'm all the way up to the 1/4 of an inch headspace. Sometimes the headspace will be up to 1.5 inches depending on what you're canning, but most jams and jellies are 1/4 of an inch. And after you've got your appropriate headspace, just go around and make sure, because you don't want any food in between the lid and the jar that will prevent it from making a full seal. So give it a good wipe. In pressure canning, some people actually use vinegar on. Do you use that with your brisket? Sometimes people actually do it with vinegar because it cuts out like the oil from the meat and stuff. But I don't do that with jam. But just make sure you've got a nice clean lid, clean top. And then we're going to take,
I noticed on here that if you were gonna freeze it, you do use a 1/2 inch instead of the 1/4.
say that again.
If you're going to freeze it, it says the headspace. is
Okay,
1/2 inch.
because freezing is going to push it up, right?
Yeah. 1/2
So I'm
inch.
putting we cleaned all of these jars and lids, so everything is clean. And then I'm just going to, now this is to the finger tighten. Now the jar is really hot, so you're just getting it to where you're not going to crank, you're not going to, you're just getting it to where it stops moving. It's tight, but it's fingertip tight is what they call
We
it.
said 2-finger tight.
Huh?
We said 2-finger tightness.
They call it finger tight, but yeah, 2-finger tight is a good way of putting it.
We'll put a screw in and they'll say 2-finger tightness.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I got to get this over. So now everything is tight. I do have a little bit more in here, but it's not going to fill this jar. So we're not, and this has, we'll put it over here.
Are you gonna put them in the spot?
Yes. So I'm going to get these in here, and then I'll tell you a little bit about your pots. I can so much that I've started to buy toys for canning, like my water bath canner and my jam and jelly maker. But you don't really need very much special equipment. And if anybody wants to come over here, there's just a little metal rack down at the bottom, because you don't want your hot jars, to sit on that super hot burner. You just want to get them up off the top. And you only need any kind of pan that's deep enough to cover all your jars by 1 inch for the canning process.
That jar is covered.
They are all covered.
You couldn't put them back in that thing you were.
I decided, well, this one isn't boiling yet, and that one is gonna boil in like,
But you could have put them back in that.
could have put them back in here, yep. Okay, so I have at least 1 inch of water. I'm on a rack, got boiling water. One thing I was telling Doreen is I noticed after our first class, the stuff that came out of the canner had a lot of hard water. It was really silvery, you know, on the jars and stuff. And I was like, I wonder how we get rid of that. So I looked it up, and they said just put a cup of vinegar in your boiling water. So if you smell the vinegar, it's because I vinegared everything, just so that when the jars come out, they're nice and pretty. I just had a lot of silver kind of stuff.
At your house? Or if you
I have a water softener at my house, so
get a water softener, we're probably okay.
yeah.
That little jar and save it? Oh,
Yeah, we'll put it right here. So I do have a little bit of leftover, and I will tell you that it's not thickening all that well. So we'll see.
It's still hot.
Do you need a timer set for that, Kate?
Here, let me hold it.
Oh, yes, is that boiling over there?
Yeah, it is.
This one over here is boiling?
Yeah.
So tell me what it says. Does it say 10
It
minutes?
says 10 minutes and adjust for out.
Yes, and so as we talked about before, there's always a 5-minute adjustment in Salina, Kansas, because we're at 1,200 feet above sea level. Boy, this is so close.
You want 15 minutes? Put that in there.
You want 15 minutes?
It's pretty short, though. I could have,
Time 15 minutes.
yeah, 15 minutes, please. And then I wanted to show you these lids. I really like to reserve my 2-part lids for actual canning, stuff that I'm going to make shelf stable. So if I end up sticking something in the fridge, I just, getting my towel in the jelly. I just use one of these plastic lids and refrigerate it and call it good. And then I know it wasn't canned. It's, you know, but you can always use a 2-part lid too. But I just find these to be, or once I've opened a jar of jelly and I've got it in the fridge, I can leave it on this and I don't have to mess with the 2-part handles. So this is Ball brand. This is an off brand, but it, yeah, again, I wouldn't can, you never can with a plastic lid, but you can stick them in the fridge that way.
Can you freeze with that one, or no, you have to use the 2-part thing when you freeze? You have to use the 2-part?
No, you could use one of these to freeze with. So again, you're going to adjust your headspace according to the recipe, and you could totally put one of these on there for freezing. The only time you need to use that 2-part lid is in the water bath or the pressure canner. And there's even a couple of brands where they have a 1-part lid, but I'm a little scared to use them. So I think they're fairly reliable brands, but it's not the science that I know, so I don't use them. So I think we're going to move on to the sand plum, but is there anything you want to talk about from that process of the peach jam before we move on?
I just have a quick question. Can you pressure can jams and jellies?
No, you don't have to. You
But
would,
I mean, if, like,
Oh,
all
could
I have
you?
is a pressure canner, you know, like, I can still pressure can it, right?
you can, but pressure canning is going to be super hard on. A lot of recipes probably do have pressure canning, but like think of your berries, they probably won't stand up very well. So pressure canning is canning under pressure. You've got a weighted gauge and all of that. In a water bath, you can never get your water hotter than 212 degrees, right? The temperature of boiling. And in fact, that's only at sea level. So as you go up, you're actually a little lower than 212. And so that's why we add on time. So if you're canning in Denver, you're going to add a lot of minutes on to the standard canning. We only add 5 minutes. Pressure canning, you change the amount of pressure that you add, but then you do this high pressure canning, which allows you to get your temperatures up to like 240 degrees. And that's when you're talking about your low acid ingredients that, that need that higher temperature to drive out all the bacteria and any botulism spores, all of that. There's nothing wrong with pressure canning, except sometimes it'll be harder on food than you need. Like I probably would never pressure can pickles. because I would think those cucumbers might just,
Be really soft.
yeah. So it just, delicate food probably isn't going to love being pressure canned. Anything else?
So I talked to an extension agent from another county, and they said that the extension, Caitlin Moore in Concordia, that county is that, Cloud County? She said that she's the canning guru.
Oh,
She's
really?
very young, but like her name's Caitlin Moore, and she said you could always call up and ask her stuff.
Yeah, and there's some really good Facebook groups too. Some of them are really, some of them there's kind of some mean girls on, which I find so weird, like they're trying to yell at people. But yeah, I would suggest, extension agents are great because they just, if they've got an expertise, they can answer your specific question. So.
I'm bringing this up to boil again.
You're bringing it up to boil? Okay.
Boil again, right?
So,
Start.
yeah, we're going to bring it to a full rolling boil. We're going to add the sugar, bring it up to a boil for 1 minute, and then we're going to can it. But let me get some more jars in the thing. And let me talk a little bit about the process of making jelly. So when I talked about that apple scrap jelly, so we were at Prairieland Market making some kind of apple tarts or something, just generating tons and tons and tons of apple peel. And I was like, I could make jam out of those, or jelly out of those. So I took them home, took all the scraps, put it in a certain amount of water, boiled it up, and pretty soon you have apple flavored water. And you discard it, you run it through a strainer, you discard the scraps, and you've just got, you can make a nice, clean, pristine jelly.
Is that enough of a boiling thing? I haven't made this one.
Oh, yeah, that's a good rolling boil. Yep. Does anybody want to come and look at the boil?
So she's boiling that stuff you had in the bag.
Yeah, so she mixed in, if you look at that recipe, and again, I cut the recipe back and I cut the sugar back. So we took 4 cups of the sand plum juice and 4 tablespoons of pectin and whisked the pectin in cold. Then you bring that all up to a rolling boil and you add, I think they did in their recipe 6, 6, and 6, but I thought it might end up too sweet. So I only did 3 cups of sugar. Again, it's not a food safety issue because sand plums are highly acidic. So she's adding 3 cups of sugar now to that. And then when I made it the first time, it made 5 cups. So this is going to happen really fast.
So sometime when you get a second, I have full of carrot right now, but could you give us just like a basic overview how your head would like set up everything?
How I set up everything?
Yeah, to have the flow, so like you start with your jars and then
Yeah.
the fruit, so that
Yeah,
so
so
it
the-
all comes together
Yes.
at the right time.
So again, if you don't want to go out and buy a bunch of stuff like this, you don't have to. You can can with ordinary equipment that you have at home. This one might even, I don't know if you could, you just about get a cup in here. You'd have to have a little rack at the bottom, but in a pinch, I've even used a towel on the bottom to can, so you could even potentially water bath in that Dutch oven. If you water bath in a Dutch oven like this, so much the better because you have even more head space. But any kind of a tall stock pot could be your thing that you're doing your water bath in. And again, the helpful pieces of equipment in my mind are the thing that measures your headspace, the thing that gets your jars out nice and safely, and the funnel, which I'm going to rinse the funnel real quick.
You said the time at 1 minute once it starts boiling again?
Once it comes back to a boil, we go 1 minute. So what I do when I start canning is the first thing I do, which another way, by the way, if you have jars that you can always put your jars in the dishwasher as long as you time it so you're pulling hot jars out of your dishwasher for canning. So when I start with my thing, the first thing I do is I either get my water bath canner going or my water bath on the stove going, because that's the thing that if I'm only doing a little bit, that's always the thing that's going to take the longest, is getting all the water to boil. Then I throw in my glass jars, and I usually put in 1 or 2 more than I think I'm going to need so that I have enough, because you don't want to be in the middle of your jam and have 1 room temperature glass. So get my water going, put my jars in it, and then I start making my, cutting up my fruit, like what you watched us do today. Cutting up my fruit and mixing the ingredients in. For jelly, there's one additional step because you got to get to the juice, right? So I oftentimes separate those two because I usually, I'll show you my little, this is my strainer. Now you can just use one of those mesh round things and put some cheesecloth in it or whatever. I usually put this over the top of a bowl, and I've got a couple of these. I just wash them in the laundry, and I dump all my fruit in here, and then I let it drip for a couple of hours until it's completely stops. When this thing is full of sand plums, I get about 2 quarts of sand plum juice. So, and I just read recently you can reprocess that sand plum pulp and get a second batch out of it. And I was like, I've never done that. I've wasted all that juice. But anyway, so this is usually the thing that I do as I'm pulling fruit off the tree. I'm going to do where I'm blanching it, or I just do a little bit of water in there. And again, if you look on recipes, some things like more water than others. This one called for a whole gallon of sand plums, but only 2 cups of water. And I thought that sounded crazy, so I did 7 quarts of sand plums to 4 cups of water, and my juice was plenty strong. So I'm going to usually make this, and then I'm going to freeze it. I put the juice in Ziploc bags, and I just freeze it until I'm ready to make my jelly. And so then another day, and again, especially if you're stovetopping it, it doesn't matter. If you're using this, try to get your ingredients kind of more down to room temperature. If you start too cold, you just won't give it enough time to. So like yesterday, I got my juices out of the freezer and put them in the fridge. And then today when I got here, I left them out on the counter to get them warm. How you doing? Are you already boiling?
It's done, the jam's done. Needs to be in the dryers.
Okay, I want to show you guys this.
You need 5 jars.
Now, and we can, this one does have a little foam. Can you guys see this very well?
Mm-hmm.
You can see it's got a little kind of scummy foam on the top. What I typically do is go along with a tablespoon and just sort of pull that scummy stuff off, because it will show in your jar. But look how, once you get past the foam, this beautiful ruby red liquid, and it's all ready to go, and it's already starting to thicken.
You couldn't have put the butter in there.
You know, maybe I could have. It wasn't part of the recipe, so I never thought of it. I've only seen the jam and jelly maker recipes use the butter. I'm going to turn this on.
Something. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Is the sand plum in your ball recipe book?
No, the sand plum recipes. In fact, I was like, I hope you can make safe jelly with sand plums. So I went to several extension. So almost every state university has got an extension agency, and Oregon, Wyoming, North Dakota, they've all got sand plum recipes. So I knew it was going to be safe to can them. I take them home and I put them in a big sink of water, cold water, and just rinse them, and there's always leaves and everything else. And then the ones that are all ready to go, I process that day. And if I've got a bunch of yellowish ones, then I put them just in a single row on a cookie sheet and leave them on the counter for a few days until they turn either that really vibrant pink or kind of a weird deep lilac. Here they are. So that is some perfectly ripe sand plums, and that's my hand, so you can see about how big they are.
Grape.
They look a little bigger than a grape. They've got a pit in them. And the nice thing about these is you just put them in the pan.
See, I saw them for the Christmas time, in between McPherson and Lindsborg, there's a trail there.
Yeah?
And I happened to be walking back today.
Oh, you got, it's the
and I
best
saw
jam.
them, but are they like sweet?
Yeah.
No, they're very tangy.
Like tart? Tangy?
They're pretty yeah, I'm gonna let you taste some of the jam. Whoops.
So you just throw them in a pot of water and boil them down and
Yeah, so
and
like,
reduced them?
I did them right here in this Dutch oven. I filled up the Dutch oven with just the cleaned sandhill plums,
But you
seeds
didn't
in
pit
them.
'em or anything?
Didn't pit them, didn't peel them, didn't do anything with them. I put 4 cups of water, which was just enough so I could see the water
Yeah.
down below the peach level. And then I just slowly cooked them got them up to a boil and boiled them for like 10, 15 minutes. And then I dump them in here with a bowl underneath it and just let all the juice come out for about 2 hours. And you can do it like grapes. You don't even have to do this. Grapes, you can put them through a little mill and just, and get the grape juice out. Again, apple scraps, you can do it this way. You can make peach jelly, you can make pear jelly, anything you want to. And just, if you don't like the bits of fruit in there. How you doing? She's never made this jelly before. I think that's okay.
Okay. It's hard to get the very last of it. I wouldn't scrape around the edge or it'll come off.
Okay, that's 15 minutes.
Yep, I agree. 15 minutes? Okay. Let me get these.
want
I'm
me
going
to
to
get
just
those
turn
out?
this off real quick. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about siphoning. But if you turn off your water bath and let the water stop boiling and give it just a few minutes to kind of come down in temperature, you have much lower chance of siphoning. And siphoning is just when there's too fast of a temperature change, and so the jam and jelly or the canned tomatoes or the whatever you're canning sort of boils over, and you'll notice like little puddles of tomato juice on your towel all around the cans. So I'm going to get these canned real quick. Let's see, I need this. Oh, this is starting to gel nicely. I believe, but would you check for me, Sandy, if that one also says a 1/4 inch headspace?
Oh, I turned this off. You wanted this to boil. Put it
Huh?
back in. I turned that on low. Are you putting those back in there?
Yeah,
It's just this
you're
one
fine.
sheet, right?
What's that?
It's just this one sheet, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Does it not give you any headspace?
I don't see it, but maybe somebody else can, let me see.
I think when I canned them before I did.
Boil for 1 minute, ladle, cover. It does not say.
Oh, see, that's sometimes the problem when you're. Well, this made it. Again, I kind of eyeball it up to about a 1/4 inch, and then I measure and make sure that my eyeballing worked.
On the sugar-free strawberry one, it says a 1/4 inch.
Every jam that I've ever made, I think, has a 1/4 inch headspace, so I'm
If you're gonna freeze it, then it's a.
pretty, yep, you're right.
Okay.
And again, if you're doing this as gifts, it's really nice not to take over something that needs to get stuck in somebody's freezer.
What do you need?
But for home use, freezing is sometimes just as easy as canning, or easier than canning,
So if you're gonna freeze those, you could just put them in that jar, put that little plastic lid on there and slap them in the, well, you probably.
Exactly, you'd be
Let 'em cool down
done.
a little bit, huh?
Let me get a little bit more. What time is it now? 7:15?
Yeah, you're rocking and rolling, girlfriend.
Oh my gosh, wow. Okay, get my lids. Well, I wanted for all of us to try some some jams and jellies. So I've got this peach jam that I put over cream cheese, and then so far I've been collecting the sand plums and making juice out of them, but this is only the second time I've made jelly out of them. So I have 1 jar of the sand plum jelly, but I really want you guys to taste it. It's like my favorite jelly of all times, I think.
And you're saying you could have used this little thing here to make your jelly with as well? The same
Yes, you can do this one too.
She wouldn't have had to stand back there and
She
do
wouldn't have had to stand there and stir.
Does it on its own.
Okay.
Maybe you have 2 going.
Do you have any idea? I've never used one, but I've seen those automatic pot stirrers. Have you seen those that you it looks like one of those things that massages your scalp is the one I've seen.
Seriously, I mean, they just sit in a pot and stir it?
You think that would probably work, wouldn't it?
You know, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, would there be any problem with scorching? But as long as it stayed like this stir down here goes way down at the bottom of the pot, so it kind of scrapes the bottom. So I don't know, I think it could work. So look at this gorgeous, isn't that? Now wouldn't that be the most perfect Christmas gift? I just love it.
So how does that grow? I mean, they're wild, but how do you get them started?
We actually, I told you we have some out on this property that we have. One thing I wanted to mention to you guys is when you grab onto these, don't grab the lid, because this lid is just a little tin lid, and if you buckled it or anything, you might compromise the lid process. So you always want to grab the glass. And by the way, so this one's been boiling for long enough that it actually doesn't have enough water in it now.
Oh, here.
I oftentimes run myself out of water. So we're going to add some hot water that's not boiling hot water. So we can't start our timer until the water starts to boil. You have to have the right amount of water in, and it has to be boiling. And if for some reason, like the police came to the door and you were on 5 minutes and you had to turn it off, you have to come back, boil it again, and start your timer over. So if it ever stops boiling while you're in the water bath, you have to start over on time. And the only danger of that really is just if you kind of overcook it. Again, like we talked about the berries and stuff, it might be awfully hard on your berries. So now I've got more than an inch of water coverage, but we have to let it boil. And then we've got a 10-minute, no, that one's only 5 minutes, isn't it?
But don't you have to add the 5?
And we have to add 5. So we're going to do a 10-minute timing when this one, yes, after it starts boiling. So these I've let sit on the towel. And you need to be really careful not to play around too much with. You just keep them all straight up. Put your tongs on the jar. Oh, they're already popping. So let me tell you about these lids too. Oh, did you hear it? Did you hear them clicking? That's my favorite sound in the world. If you look at, you never use this lid more than once. You can use the rings over and over again as long as they don't get rusty and gross. You can use the jars over and over again as long as they don't chip or crack. But these you only use once in canning. So you can use them to put your yogurt in later or whatever, but not canning. But see how, can you see this little, what's that, convex? There's a little hump in the middle. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. So when you put it on, it's still going to have that hump. I think the heat sort of boils the oxygen out of, when you put them in the water, you'll notice it bubbles a little bit. Kind of boils the oxygen out, and then when you pull it out of the heat, sometimes it'll happen in the canner, and sometimes it might not happen for an hour, but at some point it'll go. Sometimes it doesn't make a noise. Sometimes it makes a beautiful ping, but it'll suck this thing down, and it won't have a concave look to it anymore. It's just going to be flat, and that's when you know it's sealed. The other, like these, I think have already all pinged. They have. So you really don't want to mess with your jams while they're still hot. You don't want to do very much with them until they've had 12 hours. But we heard these all click, and now you can see that there's no convex hump in the middle. So we know that that one is sealed. The other way to tell if a jar is sealed, and Doreen and I were just talking about this the other day because both of us had a fail recently, but you should not be able to get this lid off with your hands. You need like a church key kind of thing. If you ever can get it off with your hands, you need to throw it away because it didn't seal properly and it's been shelf stable and you don't want to use that. But this is how, whenever I pull a jar out, I always make sure that that lid is not finger openable. Yeah. A lot of canning websites will suggest that you actually take the rings off once they've sat for 12 hours. Take the ring off, wipe down the side of the jar because sometimes you'll have a little bit of jelly on the outside, and then store them like that and don't stack them, because then if the seal spoils, you'll be able to see it. I don't do that because I think they look cuter like this, and I stack them too because I don't have that much room. But when I pull them off, I always check that lid, and if I ever get one that doesn't require a lever to get it off, I throw it away. So this has not started boiling yet, so we still have 10 minutes. So let's have some jam and jelly. You what? Did you think I was going to forget?
We thought you'd never ask.
By the way, there's bottles of water over there too. I didn't offer up any water. You guys found it? Okay, good.
No, I brought my own because I didn't know.
One thing that I always do, and you should too, even if you're not making a label, just use the black magic marker or any color permanent marker and put what it is so you don't wonder later, and also when you canned it. Because typically, and I know people that have used their canned goods for 3 years or so. If I go much past 2, I'm going to throw them away. But
No, call me. Here's my number.
okay, I'll call you, Sandy. But you always want to date it. Say you're making, like I have all this frozen plum juice right now. If you're making a bunch of plum juice, you want to get your earliest stuff out first, right? So you made some in August, some in September, some in October. So one thing that I want to mention is that there is such a thing as going too many batches when you're making jam and jelly. Now, this wouldn't have affected your recipe, but you just reminded me that sometimes if you go with too much, it takes too long to get it heated. Like you've got a gigantic kettle of jam and jelly and it takes too long to get it heated, you can kind of mess with your pectin and therefore mess with your set. So, but a triple batch of that tomato jam should not have made any difference at all.
Is that boiling yet?
Oh, it's just getting started. Let's give it one more minute and then we're ready to go.
And then when it asks you like how much, like if it says like 3 pounds of like tomatoes or fruit, that's like when you're buying it. Or is that after you processed, like you peeled it?
Seems to me some of them are really specific about that. They'll say 3 pounds of tomatoes as purchased, and then they tell you to core the tomato and peel it and all that and cut out the bad spots. Some of them are not very specific, and if I recall that recipe, I went to 3 pounds diced tomatoes because I felt like by the time I got all the cores and the bad spouts out,
Well, that's what
I
we
did not have enough left, you know?
And is there any easier way to get the seeds out?
Oh,
With
well,
tomatoes?
if you don't mind spending some money, there's an easy. Do you have a KitchenAid mixer?
Yes.
There are 2 attachments you can buy together. I do that when I make tomato juice. One of them is like a meat grinder, and then you add this other, I'll have to look it up for you, but well, I do straight up tomato juice, and you just pump it all through, and you've got your KitchenAid mixer going, and it just all happens automatically.
That's all right.
The what?
Because that's what took the longest, was like going through and getting out the
Oh, I
little
bet.
whatever.
You don't, one of the things that you don't want to do is check and see with your finger if the lid has popped down, because if you pop it down, it may go, oh, it'll stay that way, but it's not necessarily sealed. So just when you even, it's really hard for me to discipline myself to not tip them side by side and stuff, but this is not a completely leak-proof vessel at this point when it's still hot. So you want to just keep it as straight as possible. And if it bugs you that there's that pool of water on the top, just take a little paper towel and dab on it. But don't put your finger on it. You really want to let this do nothing but sit there and look pretty for about 12 hours. And then the next day, you can do whatever you want to do. Sometimes there'll be, because of siphoning, so did we talk about siphoning enough? Okay, because of
glad you mentioned
siphoning, sometimes you'll have a sticky outside because some of the jam will have overflowed. And another thing, that's what I wanted to talk to you about siphoning. Again, it's because you change temperatures too quickly on it. But it's not a food safety issue. It's okay, even if sometimes when you're canning, you might end up with, at the end of the can, so much siphoned out that now your jam only comes to here. And that's still a safe recipe. If you canned it appropriately and it just siphoned at the end and it gave you more headspace than the recipe called for, that's okay.
As long as that popped down.
But as long as it's sealed and everything else went according to plan, if you start with a headspace that's down here, it's not safely canned. But even sometimes people will do like raw pack chicken, and I've seen raw pack where like the chicken, you know, as you remove moisture, as you cook that chicken, so the chicken might only be up to here, and then the juice is only up to there, and you're like, okay, that looks really weird. But as long as it was canned according to all the processing rules, it's still a safe recipe. Food that's sitting outside in a vacuum sealed jar that's sitting outside of the juice sometimes will discolor, so it's not as attractive. But again, it's probably, if you canned it appropriately, it's still safe to eat. If you ever open anything and it's got a bad smell, throw it away. So the smell is, or if it's got like mold on the top, sometimes you'll see a little, when you do the jam and jelly with a little bit of butter, you'll see a little bit of butter residue on the top. That's okay. But if you see, you know, you get a can out 12 months later and it's got mold growing on it, just throw the whole thing away. I mean, you can reuse the jar, but throw the jam
Anybody
away.
want the last little cream cheese?
Nope.
So that's a reduced sugar peach recipe that I made from my peach trees.
This is sweet. That plum stuff is really sweet.
You think it's sweet? Oh, I think it's so tangy.
You do?
Do you guys think it's sweet or tangy? To me, it's got a bite to it.
Yeah, like there's a little heat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they had it equal parts sand plum juice, pectin, and sugar. And I was like, that's too much sugar for me. So I cut it. But you could even cut it back further. The only thing that you're risking is, do you get a good set?
Yeah.
It's still safe, but you could make it less sweet than that. Okay. Is there anything else we haven't talked about? Okay, so again, I'm just going to turn this off just to avoid, I don't get siphoning very often, but when you do, it just messes your jars all up and everything. So I'm just going to turn this off, take the lid off, let it stop boiling, bring the temperature down just a little bit before I pull my jars out of here, just to avoid any siphoning. So I think we're there, girls.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you could can some jam?
Definitely now.
One thing I want to tell you, I think at the beginning when I first started canning, you know, like at my mom's side, we would always can 40 jars at a time. And especially when you're learning and you're new, that is so overwhelming. Like every time I would go to start canning again, I'd be like, okay, what were all the steps and what do I have to do? So I think if you want to build your confidence and your experience, doing small batch canning is just the best. Even if, like for instance, when my peaches all come at the same time, I probably get 200 or 300 peaches off my tree. And so when they're all coming and everything, and I've got peaches all over the counter that maybe weren't quite ripe enough, and I will either blanch them, slice them, and then put them in my food saver bags and freeze them. So now I can make peach cobbler or peach jam or whatever. Towards the end of the season, I just throw them in whole in the freezer. And I'm like, I don't have any more energy for this. And I'm also making canned jam. And this year I did actual canned peaches and light syrup. My husband just adores them. But feel free to freeze some of those raw ingredients when you've got that seasonality and they're beautiful and all of that. And you might want to dunk them in a little fruit fresh first, because the peaches that I just threw straight into my freezer, once I thaw them, they're pretty dark, you know. But and then you can make, like I can make jam in January because I've got peaches ready to go, you know.
You just thaw them out and do your
Just
thing.
thaw them out, and
do your thing.
when you thaw them, the things come off really easily, the skins, and so. But that's the way that I kind of keep it, so that I don't have to spend an entire weekend making, 40 bushels of peaches or something. So.
And rhubarb freezes nicely too.
And what?
The rhubarb.
And the rhubarb. So we have a friend that gives us rhubarb, and it comes ripe one time of the year, and I just take it all, then put it in little, probably about this thick, 1/2-inch slices, put it in food saver bags, and then through the year I mix it with berries or I've made strawberry rhubarb, blackberry rhubarb, raspberry rhubarb, and but I just kind of keep my ingredients when they're fresh. I freeze them, and then I make jam out of them later.
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to take these out. Doreen, is there anything you can think of that I should have talked about and didn't?
I can't think of anything. I'm still writing it and covering it all.
Look at that.
Oh, that's pretty. Pretty color.
This would be the prettiest Christmas gift. Another one that's fun. Do you guys like? Whoa, that was bad. Do you guys do jalapeno jelly? Do you like jalapeno jelly?
Mhm.
So you can do jalapeno jellies. Either use green jalapenos and make green, or red and make red. But I have also added some food coloring, just a little bit of food coloring to kind of enhance. So you get like Christmas red or Christmas green.
Those are so pretty.
And that doesn't mess, you're only using a little bit, so it doesn't mess with your food safety.
I don't know if Atwood has it. My sister has a store by her. It's called Rural King, and it's like an Atwood's, but they have like peach jalapeno, strawberry jalapeno. I mean, everything with the and it's the best jam. And
so
and they
good.
mix it, and I would have never thought about putting jalapeno. with
Jalapeno
that.
mixed with fruit is really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's just real. I got 3 or 4 jars.
I
in
also
my fridge
love
here now.
bourbon mixed with fruit jelly.
Ooh, that
Bourbon
sounds
goes
good.
good with almost all fruit jellies and jams. So I do a blackberry, and I do put Jack Daniels in it, and I call it blackjack jelly. A jam. It's jam. It's not
You need
jelly.
to have a cannon party or something.
That's what this was.
Yeah.
This kitchen's big enough. Bring it all.
Yeah, we could just all bring our own jars and go.
You can, yeah. If that's why, I mean, Doreen and I get together a lot, because then you got somebody to chat with while you're.
Yeah.
This one had a little bit.
Now, you have to let me
Oh,
know.
it had a little bit of siphoning in it, didn't it?
No, it has a little bit of those milky.
I know.
It has a little bit of the foam in it, so it probably won't come out quite as clear as the other ones. But I'm still really happy with it.
Oh,
They're pretty.
did you make your peach ones? They they thick enough.
Did your
They
peach?
set
Is
up?
peach set up? Like, did you look at it? I'm just curious.
Let's look at, so usually again, I don't mess with my jars until they've been in there a while. But this is the one that it's a little loose.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's going to go in the fridge, that will thicken it up, and time will thicken it.
Right.
But this might end up being a little bit thin. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, and I think it's an issue of getting your food heated all the way through. If you don't get it all heated all the way through, you risk some floating. So you'd have clear jelly down here, and then all your peaches would be floating at the top. So that's another thing where I think the jam and jelly maker kind of makes sure that it gets all cooked. But one of the first times I used this, I used some ice cold peaches or some kind of fruit in it, and then it didn't all get all the way done. So I had jam, jelly on the bottom, fruit on the top. But it is a matter of cooking everything all the way through.
And then the fruit or like the tomatoes or peaches, they don't have to be. You actually want them very ripe, right? You don't want them like underripe or perfect. They can be like you could just cut the bad. You can. Do you cut the bad? Like if there's a little bruising?
Yes. So you never want to leave any of the bad in fruit. You want to cut that out and liberally cut it out. Because if you introduce bacteria into your canning process, you're going to create bacteria. For jams and jellies, oftentimes they will, especially if you're a non-pectin user, they will oftentimes tell you maybe use 1/4 of your total fruit underripe and the rest of it ripe, because underripe fruit has more pectin than ripe fruit. If you're using pectin, that's kind of less of an issue. And I just want to make sure that my flavors are good, like with the Sandhill plums. When they're not ripe, they're super astringent, very dry and kind of like a dry red wine. And so I make sure that I get them all, I ripen them in batches so that they're ripe enough to be sweet. So I think it's more of a flavor thing if you're using pectin. If you're not using pectin, underripe some is good.
Okay. Because when we made that peach butter, like, we blanched the peaches, and then some of them weren't very ripe, and so it was harder to get the peel off of them.
It will be harder to peel them. The other thing is, if your fruit is too firm, it's not gonna, how that jam was kind of all one color? It's not gonna mix in as well. You're gonna have little hard pieces of fruit and then jelly. And so a couple times when I've used fruit that's a little firmer, they say be careful about not pureeing it because you mess with the pectin. But I'll put it in my food processor and just pulse it a few times so I get it broken down into small enough pieces that I don't feel like I've got jelly and a chunk. Jelly, So, but just be really gentle with your pureeing, or you can knife cut into smaller pieces. Hi, I'm Katie Platten, and this is a Prairieland Market community education class. Thanks for watching.